Wow, fancy. Okay, hi, welcome everyone. Welcome to our resume workshop agenda. First of all, let's welcome and also very appreciate our speaker, Thanh Nguyen today. And I'll give a very brief introduction of Thanh Nguyen's background so that you know how amazing the speaker is for today. So Thanh Nguyen is the director of In-house Counsel Recruiting with the major MLA, Major Lindsey Africa, where she focuses on helping organizations to find top lawyers and compliance professionals across all industry. And prior to joining MLA, Thanh was an in-house at PepsiCo Inc., where she developed the company's global anti-corruption third-party due diligence program and conducted FCPA internal investigations. Before going in-house, she was a litigation associate at Lanham Watkins in Chicago. Thanh graduated from the George Washington University Law School and went to Northwestern University for undergrad. She recently completed a year-long round the world travel sabbatical with her husband and a 3-year-old son, living in 12 different countries throughout Asia, Europe, and South America, which is amazing. I really envy his experience. And as for myself, I'm Angela Chen. I'm Wei Ming Chen actually, but you can call me Angela. And I'm the member of the In-house committee for a while, and I'm now senior counsel for Unity Technologies supporting social impact and consumer org. And yeah, Curdy, probably everyone knows her, but let her introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Kriti Rajput. I'm Senior Corporate Counsel at App Dynamics, which is part of Cisco. And I'm also on the board of the Asian American Bar Association. And I was formerly a co-chair of the In-house Committee, and they host some great events. And we are looking for new members. So if you are interested in joining our committee after this presentation, shoot me a note. Feel free to email me at kriti.rajput@gmail.com. I will put it in the group chat, the chat here for you guys as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think so Thanh has have review all of our resumes, and she'll start with some overview and very high level views about some common steps and also some insights that applies to all of us, even regardless of where you're junior or senior. There are some overview highlights that Thanh is gonna share with us before we dive into further detailed questions.
Great. Thanks, Angela, for that kind introduction. And thank you all for joining. I'm excited to be here. It's a true honor to be part of your career journey. So I can't see all of your hands because some of you are not on video, but show of hands, how many of you just love updating your resume? And if I can't see you, you feel free to just raise your hand, even if you're not on video. I don't see any hands. Well, look, that's fine. I'm happy that you're here. Give yourself a pat on the back for investing. Thank you. I see a couple of hands. That's okay if you don't love updating your resume. Who does? Updating your resume is something that we often do during life transitions, sometimes amidst chaos when we're consumed with work, school, and life. And honestly, reducing your entire career down to a few pages can be daunting. So today I'm going to share 5 steps for revising or updating your resume, and then we can get into some questions to address what's on your mind. Some of this may sound basic, but it's high-level reminders for you to put in time to put yourself in a successful frame of mind for approaching this daunting task. So with that, I'll start with the first step. My advice is to begin with the end in sight. Resumes are about the future and not just the past. Most of us take the last version of our resume and we update it with what we've been doing. But what got you here to your current job won't necessarily get you to the next. So what we have to do is revise the resume with an eye towards the future. The best resumes tell a narrative or a story about what you might want to do next in your career, so that an employer can look at your resume and easily see their job or company fitting perfectly in with your story. So second, what's the next step? Now that you've done some work thinking about what you want to do, it's a great time to look at other resume templates, bios or profiles of those doing what you want to do, to get an idea of how to describe your experiences. This can also be a really fun way to network for jobs. So you've looked at templates, bios, and profiles. Step 3, work off of a clear, concise, organized template. You're now going to do the writing in your resume. The best templates in my view, and the best fonts, the best styles, are the ones that are easy to read, not fancy, not distracting to the reader. You might ask around for templates to see which ones you like. Err on the side of a clean, concise, organized template with bullets and not big chunks of information that are lumped together. And we'll get into that further down in the discussion. Fourth, try not to data dump or use fancy legal language. Focus on descriptive action verbs. Write about the results of what you did, not just the process. In other words, just write for a layman audience. The first eyes on your resume in an in-house job hunt aren't necessarily lawyers, like most of the recruiters you'd work with at major Lindsey Africa. Instead, oftentimes they're in-house talent acquisition professionals who usually are not lawyers. So use language that is clear for anyone to read. For example, you could use action verbs like lead, spearhead, drive, manage, rather than more passive language like I was part of a team leading project X. Describe the outcome, the solutions, the results, such as obtained a $400 million successful verdict in federal court, and not just the process, such as represented client in federal proceeding. One last step here, step 5, cut extra words everywhere you can. The goal here isn't to get to some artificial page limit, like a page or 2. When I'm reviewing hundreds of resumes at a time, the length doesn't matter so much as whether the resume appears clean, clear, concise, organized, and easy to read. Your goal is to demonstrate that you can be brief, efficient, and effective with words in the shortest amount of space. Essentially, your resume is a reflection of you, the way your mind works, how you think, and how you write. Similar to the way you present in an interview, how you show up on camera, in person, likewise on paper, you're trying to garner trust and credibility with every interaction. So, show in words that you are a clear communicator, and you will have more success catching recruiters and employers' eyes. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kriti and Angela for questions.
Thank you. That was really cool. I think our first question is, what are the common mistakes you've seen on our resumes that you reviewed? And I'll share my screen.
Thanks for that question. Well, the resumes that I reviewed in this group, really great resumes, by the way, all around. There was a range. I will share excerpts from my own resume, actually. So what you've got in the screen that Kriti has shared, and Kriti, you have that up already, right? Can everyone see what Kriti is sharing?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, great. So the first common mistake is just a messy or disorganized or inconsistent formatting. You know, this might not look so bad. What you've got in red, the red box, are, you know, bullets that are sort of jumbled together and not consistent from line to line. And it might not look so bad on just a few lines here, but if you can imagine across an entire page or 2, these are distractions to the reader. So formatting, believe it or not, is the first thing that a recruiter or an employer sees. And in a huge, large stack of resumes, this disorganization can get you dinged right off the bat. You want your employer or reader to pick your resume and call you in for an interview. So don't get dinged early on for formatting. The one that's in the green box is just easier on the eye to read, where all the bullets are lined up. These are simple things that, you know, believe it or not, we see very often: inconsistent formatting, a messy or disorganized template. The second, if you can flip to the second page, Kriti. The second common mistake we see are lots of focus on process. For example, talking about being responsible for M&A deals and not just focusing on the results. And you can talk about both, but it's important to also remember that you want to talk about the most impressive facts from your experience. So for example, instead of talking about just responsible for M&A deals, you could talk about leading 25 plus domestic and global M&A deals including AT&T's $110 billion acquisition of Time Warner. That's detailed enough that you're calling out some very impressive facts with numbers that show the outcome or the results of your process. The third common mistake, oh, and I'll just add here, as lawyers, we generally hedge a lot. We try to be accurate. We don't want to overstate. So often on a resume, we reduce our impact. We try not to be arrogant. We talk about drafting, reviewing, being responsible for participating in. We add in a lot of extra words to make sure that we're being absolutely accurate. But in the process, don't forget to talk about what you achieved or your successes. So don't be afraid to use those descriptive direct action verbs and power words like led, spearheaded, directed, managed, oversaw. And if there are any questions, by the way, happy to address anything that you want to address along the way. So third common mistake are extraneous words. So we often see in resumes just fillers. And across an entire resume, extra words and fillers can easily double the length of a resume. So instead of saying that you provided representation, training, mentoring, or coaching, just say represented, trained, mentored, coached. This not only reduces the length of your resume, it puts you in the spotlight with more power and impact. Fourth common mistake, you can flip to the next page. Tiny font size or inconsistent fonts. We see this often, and even though, we want to fit more on a page, so sometimes we'll try to squeeze it in by putting in font. Let's not try to reduce the length by cheating on font size. Don't try to appear sloppy with inconsistent font types and sizes in the same sections. Make sure that you're using at least 11 size font or 12. And then if you can flip to the last common mistake, we often see trying to save space on a resume. We will often lump information in the red box. Using bullets and breaking it all up into digestible bites is so much easier to read and digest and understand. The lump above, you see the whole chunk there, is really hard to read, and I've seen that across a number of resumes. And it does save a little bit of space, but it's not, you can cut words instead of lumping information that way. You want to break it all up into digestible bites that people can see more easily. So I think we have a question from Debbie. Do we want to address that now, or do you want to reserve it towards the end?
We can go ahead and address it live.
Okay.
Debbie asked, lead conveys that you were the top banana doing something or the only one, but what if you were part of a team and your team as a whole did something great?
That's a great question. So you want to obviously be honest. And so if you were leading, then it's great to say that you led. If you were part of a team leading, I don't think it's inaccurate to say that you also led. You're not saying that you were the sole lead attorney. So if it's accurate, use these power verbs and descriptive action words when you can. And where you're part of a team, it's fine to do that too. This is not to say that you shouldn't overstate. But where you can, I think as lawyers, we tend to be humble and we want to really kind of be part of a team, and we don't want to always put ourselves in the spotlight. But if you think about your goal on a resume is to get noticed, and so where you can really highlight yourself and take that spotlight, go ahead and use it, reduce your resume length, but also put yourself in that spotlight when you can. Another question from George.
Angela, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So we also got a question from George asking, what do you think of extra page at the end of the resume that include representative experience?
That's a great question. And George, if you want to unmute and elaborate further, that's fine too, because this should be interactive.
Sure. Yeah, I've seen that where, you'll often sort of just summarize, like, for example, like led 25 M&A transactions, but at the end, you may include sort of more details or talk about the deals at length. And especially because for so many of us, there's a kind of a volume aspect to what we've done, right? Like I've done 25 M&A deals, I've launched, 10 funds or whatever the case may be. And so I think that it can be like, my sense is when I've seen those in the past, it's helpful to kind of show like, wow, this person's actually done like a lot of work and has had a lot of experience. But that will, also make the page, the resume several pages long.
That's a great question, George. And I think the best, all of this depends on what kind of representative experience. But when you're talking about a deal sheet, in my view, and I've discussed this with many MLA recruiters, it's probably best to have it as a separate document rather than embedded within the resume. Your goal on the resume in terms of an ideal length is somewhere between a page and 2 pages. It's no longer the case that everyone expects you to get it down to 1 page.
Right.
2 pages is fine. 3 pages begins to be quite lengthy for any level of experience. The longest I've ever seen was like 16 pages long, and it the right message. The candidate had like 10 pages of publications, for example. So if you've got something like a deal sheet, just keep it as a separate document altogether. And it's absolutely great to have a deal sheet because you want to keep track of those deals so that you can kind of enumerate, how many publicly traded company deals you had, what size of those transactions, how many JVs, that sort of thing. So great question. Does that answer your question, George?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. So if there's no other questions about the common mistake, I'm going to move to the next question, which is what is your view on using mission statements at the top of the resume? Because some of ours get suggested it's good, but some other peers sometimes told us it's not like a lawyer. So what's your view on it?
It's all about the content. If used correctly, mission statements or summaries up top can be very effective, but there are some do's and don'ts. So do summarize what kind of lawyer you are, your focus, your practice areas, a short summary of the areas of expertise and maybe your leadership skills. Do not regurgitate essentially what you say below or add a lot of flowery fluff. We do see mission statements that talk, there's a lot of flowery language in there, or it's a regurgitation or like a summary that's a very lengthy summary of what you say later on in your resume. That's not as effective. So I think the best mission statements or summaries up top, if it's just a few lines, can be really about what kind of lawyer, what practice area. So someone can quickly, succinctly look at, your story. What kind of lawyer are you and what are you looking to do?
Is it typical? I mean, would you say that like that's, kind of the exception, or that more people are actually doing that?
I would say it's a mixed bag. I see it more often with more senior level attorneys because as a junior lawyer or, even less years of experience, it's hard to summarize what kind of lawyer, you may change practice areas from, anywhere from 0 to 5 years of experience. You haven't had enough years of experience to really specialize. We see it more often with the more senior seasoned legal professionals who are summarizing maybe 10, 15, 20 years of experience, and they want to kind of talk about their breadth of experience across maybe 3 to 5 different practice areas.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I see we got a question here asking, is there value to adding a section for key skills and affiliations, or should one's resume focus just on experience and accomplishments?
That's a good question. So when we get into things like affiliations, bar associations, publications, a lot of other kind of extras, if you're applying for a position that those things are relevant to, it's all about whether it's relevant to what you're applying for and the kinds of positions that you're applying to, right? So the things that we see that are extraneous tend to be things like bar membership numbers, like no one needs that additional detail. In terms of honors and distinctions and key skills are good to include. Where it gets to be a bit much is when people put in things that are just like, if you got a great LSAT score and you put that in, that's a little odd. But the honors and the distinctions that we typically see are things like law review, order of the coif, or top 5% of the class, things that are relevant and pretty high level. In terms of affiliations, I think it's good to show that if you're a part of like a nonprofit board and you're applying for a role, that there could be some connection or relevance. There's a lot of GC searches that we do where employers are looking to see that gravitas and that social consciousness. And is this a person who is doing more beyond just their daily work? All the nonprofit boards that this candidate might be on, really relevant. So think broadly about whether the things that you've done would apply to the positions that you're applying for. That's a great question, though.
All right. So what is the ideal length for my resume?
We touched upon this earlier. In my view, it's 1 to 2 pages, and there isn't like a magic number. The goal here is to be clear, concise, and brief. So when I look at resumes, I don't ding someone because they submitted 3 pages or 4 pages. It's really about the content. So if it takes you 3 pages, if it takes you 2 pages, once you start getting into 3 pages, it is becoming too lengthy for any level of experience. The majority of the GC, even GC resumes, are 2 pages and under. So I think, ideally 1, if it gets into 2, maybe 2.5, fine. But 3 and above is getting quite lengthy because you really want to demonstrate that you can be efficient and concise and clear in the shortest amount of space. And everyone should be able to do that under 3 pages.
I see we also have a general question here from Debbie, but since I saw it's more like general, we can probably leave it at the end of the Q&A. And yeah, I have another question here representing some law students or junior lawyers that because some of our membership are like law students or even juniors. What are some thoughts you have on attracting employers' attention when your experience is so thin? Definitely, you don't have like 25 MA deals on your resume. Yeah, what's the suggestion to overcome that?
So I think that's a great question because as recruiters, we often do see when employers sometimes will say, I want a minimum level of experience at 6 years. And you have a candidate who's close but shy by a few years of experience, right? What we often recommend is to think broadly about your skill sets and experiences. So if you have volunteer, internship, or pre-law experiences that are relevant specifically to the position you're applying for, include it. Paralegal experiences. For example, if you were a biomedical engineer before law school and you're applying in-house to a medical device company, include that experience. It makes sense to do that. Another example is I had a recent real estate search for an employer who wanted 6+ years of real estate legal experience. The candidate had 4. Her resume omitted the fact that she worked in the real estate industry before law school, and that did impact her candidacy. So think broadly and think about ways that you can get to the number of years, get to kind of beef up your experience, even if it's not during law school or after law school. Another thing that you can do is also include relevant publications or activities. So if you're applying for an in-house IP position and your resume feels thin on IP experience, legal experience, include things like your IP publications, your IP law review experience, anything that you did before law school that might relate to IP, such as engineering.
So the next question kind of is similar to the frame that you just presented, but could you specifically elaborate a little bit more on the types of publications, honors, and distinctions that are really important to highlight in a resume? And maybe not just for junior lawyers, but also for more senior lawyers who might have publications listed on their resume?
We like to see really publications and honors and distinctions that relate to what you're doing or what you want to do. So even in the resumes that many of you submitted, you might have publications during undergrad or law school that relate to a practice area that isn't relevant to what you've been doing in the past, 7 to 10 years. And so that information, it's not that it's not valuable, it's just that it takes up really valuable real estate space in your resume. So reserve any extra space for honors, distinctions, and publications when it's specifically relevant and helpful to the jobs that you want. And this kind of relates back to the resume is really about your future, your next stage of your career. It isn't about how do I get the jobs that I have now or that I've done. It's about helping you position yourself for that next step. So if you started as, focused on IP, but you haven't done IP work in the past 5 to 7 years, and you've moved into a very general commercial role, and you now want to be a general counsel, does it make sense to use that real estate on all of your IP publications? Because it probably won't be relevant to the employer that's looking at your resume.
Sounds good. Curdy, do you want to move to the question about gaps?
Sure. So what is the best way to handle gaps in my resume?
Okay, resume gaps. There's many different kinds of resume gaps, and for all different types of reasons, family leave. I actually had one. I took a sabbatical year to travel the world with my husband and my son for a year. And I remember my husband saying, do you want to put that on your resume? It's sort of a personal thing. I put it on my resume as one of my experiences, and it was a conversation starter for many of my in-house interviews. But if it's something personal to you that you would rather not address in your resume, there are kind of 2 ways that you can handle it. One is you can gloss it over, but be prepared to address it in an interview. Or another way that you can do it is if you have something applicable during the time that you took that leave or that break, that you could slot in something semi-professional. Maybe you were volunteering, maybe you were consulting on the side, maybe you were running a side business, anything that can kind of stand in for that gap, even if it's not on the same level as all of your other legal experiences. So that's how we've seen gaps handled for the most part. If it's something that you wouldn't mind addressing, you don't need to put in your resume that you were taking leave to help family or to deal with, family that was sick. You don't need to include that in your resume. If it's something else that you feel like you're proud of and you want to talk about, like volunteering, consulting, running a side business, that makes sense to include it.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I know Debbie has a question here, so I'm gonna read it out. Should a LinkedIn profile and a resume be substantially similar in content? Or as a recruiter, do you expect to see a different writing style or different content between them?
Debbie, I really like that question. Recruiters nowadays are using LinkedIn in substantially the same way as a resume. Of course, a resume is always more detailed, oftentimes than a LinkedIn page. But what we're seeing is that LinkedIn is a great way to find candidates and to find, employees and people who are looking for jobs. But oftentimes people don't update their resume. So do definitely keep your LinkedIn substantially updated. And it's always good to have a short description of what you did in each job so that people can kind of see. So it should track your resume to a certain degree. Sometimes it's also helpful in both your resume and your LinkedIn profile to include short details about the company you were at. So if you were at a company that is a startup that went IPO and is now publicly traded, and it isn't a company that you think everyone would recognize, include a short description of what the company does and your role so that people really immediately know. They might not recognize the company, but in a sentence or 2, they'll know what the company does and your role within that company. So I do think that the resume and LinkedIn should track each other, but be sure to make sure that your LinkedIn profile at least is updated in everything that you're doing, and do have at least a short, maybe 1 to 3 lines under each position about what you did there.
Sounds good. So we got another question from Pamela. She asks, with the use of resume filtering program software, what are your thoughts about tailoring your resumes to add terms, statutes, or other words in the job posting to try to get your resume noticed by the software?
That's a really good question. There's no substitute for, we review resumes, without using software at MLA. But I do think the bigger point here is that you do want to use the key buzzwords in your industry. So you don't necessarily have to, there's some recruiters who might say you should tailor and customize your resume for every job. I think that's a bit much because it's hard to tailor yourself for every job you're applying for. You might be applying for dozens and dozens of jobs. To revamp your resume every single time is quite exhausting. The more effective way is to figure out, do that mental hard work of what you want to do so that you can zoom in on, here are the kinds of industries I want to work in. Here are the kinds of jobs that I want. And once you've identified that and narrowed it down, you will start to see the trends in the kinds of words and buzzwords that end up getting picked up by recruiters in terms of finding, relevant candidates.
Thank you. And actually it's Curtis' question, but I'll just go over it. So we also got another question, is that what if I am only at my current employer for a short time, I hate it, and I'm not applying for a new job. Do I still have to include it on my resume?
So if you're employed there, even if you just started, I think it's good to include it. I think you should err on the side of transparency, because the worst thing that you can do is have eyebrows raised because you didn't disclose and the employer finds out that you were working there. So again, resumes, LinkedIn profiles, these are all tools to garner trust and credibility with potential employers. And so you want to start off on the right foot. If you're there for a month and you admit that you're there, it's very easy for employers to find out what you're doing. And so I would err on the side of transparency.
I see. To add more colors on that question, I think we all know that it's important to be honest. And what if the new employer just approach us and ask, not the new employers, but I mean those interview you, ask why you stay here for such a short period and now you're considering transferring job. What are the best response to those kind of questions?
That question we get all the time, and we do see candidates who are looking after a month or two being somewhere. I think the way to address it, if you've been contacted by a talent acquisition person in-house or a recruiter, you're technically not actively looking. You're in a passive mode because they reached out to you. So that's one of the easiest answers, is that, look, I was recruited, I was asked. And so yes, I'm doing well, but this other opportunity is just the perfect fit. So it's sort of like you're not running away, you're moving towards a new opportunity. So that's a lot easier to say. But if you also are in the position of, hey, you've been actively reaching out, and the question is, why are you looking to move all of a sudden? I think it's important to kind of show throughout your career history that you're not a job hopper, because that does become a red flag. If you're constantly looking for a new role within a year, and you've moved multiple times under a year, that does become a red flag for a lot of employers and recruiters. So you have to kind of tie it back to your entire career history. Here are the times when I've had really, I've done really well. I've stayed in long-term positions. And the fact that you just happen to be in a role that you're not exactly happy with, you have to focus on why this next opportunity is the perfect fit, rather than coming at it from a defensive posture and saying why that you never want to disparage your current employer, even if you know that it's not the right fit for you. So it's really reframing and repackaging.
That is really great feedback. I would love to know, I've definitely seen really cool looking resumes that have other colored font in there or a picture in there? And I know George has this question here, what really makes resumes stand out? So this is a two-parter. What do you think about resumes that are multicolored or that have someone's picture on them? And secondly, what are other things that a candidate can do to make their resume stand out?
Okay. So on the question of colors and things that are fancy, let's face it, as a group, as lawyers, we're kind of boring, right? Like we like the conservative, streamlined. I don't go for, when you focus on like making it snazzy, that doesn't really attract, that doesn't, like what's impressive is you, what you've done, and the content and the substance of your experiences and what you have to offer. So I don't think it fools anyone when you put in, and it actually is distracting when you have lots of things going on in a resume. So I think, again, going back to the common, mistakes and the 5 tips that I provided earlier on, your goal in this resume is to keep your resume as least distracting as possible and easy to read. So I think one color overall is better. If you highlight some things in like navy, fine. If you have a photo, that's fine too, although there are employers that will prefer not to have your photo because they want to be able to look at everyone on the same standing and not to be, having any sort of bias. And so photos are sometimes relevant or acceptable, sometimes they're not. In terms of making your resume stand out, it's the clean, clear lines, and you'll see it like, in the range of resumes that you provided, there were several that were just immediately you gravitated towards that resume because the formatting was clean and clear and organized. And the spacing was clean and clear and organized. The font wasn't too small. It was 11 or 12. I could read it. And then you can zoom in on what they did rather than trying to get through chunks of data. So that's really what makes resumes stand out, is spending the time to get it to be streamlined and really brief and really concise and really organized. But since that's George's question, George, did you have anything further that you wanted to elaborate on that? Or is there like any examples or anecdotes?
Well, no, I mean, I think it's just I think there's always a bit of a tension between adding in detail and trying to kind of stay concise and summary. And so, like you might, I don't know, for me, like I worked at a job and it was like 8 years, right? Or 9 years. And I like reduced it to 4 bullet points. And while those are impactful bullet points, you're like, wow, like that's really it. Like 9 years of work is 4 bullet points. But I think that's sort of a tension I always face as I think about my resume.
That's such a great point. And it's almost, I think it feels very sad to reduce our lives, careers down to a few bullets, but less is more on your resume. So the 4 bullets that you have, make it count and make it matter, right? And that's where language and I think a lot of us, we tend to want to put the fanciest language in. We try to put in certifications. Some of us have certifications all the way back to like high school and college and things that we did then. My senior honors thesis, I wanted to put that in, but it's not. I did a senior's honors thesis on human trafficking. It's not quite relevant anymore. And so it's just reevaluating and revamping with the future in mind and figuring out how to use the space that you have in the most effective way. And that's where I think networking and getting examples from people that are in the kinds of jobs that you want, that's critical, because you won't know what that looks like until you start asking people. And I know it's daunting to ask someone for their resume, but you might be able to look on their bio page, right? What you can find online. You can look on LinkedIn and social media. There's a lot of ways to kind of get the content that you're looking for and incorporate it into your own.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. And we got another question from Sophia, and she said, I've been a solo practitioner for 5 years and now looking to go in-house. I've heard some recruiters say that they wouldn't even consider a solo practitioner for these positions. Do you have any recommendations to stand out?
So I think that there is in our field a bit of a bias against, gosh, if you put up your own shingle, what does that mean for your career? I definitely think that it's short-sighted, because there's many reasons why someone might be a solo practitioner, for flexibility, more work-life balance, whatever it is. And I think if you can show, again, that narrative of kind of showing why you might have gone into that practice, it's really, again, if you want to stand out, it's all about what you bring to the table and what you offer, not the name of your firm or the place. I mean, of course, those things are attractive. Like when you work at a big law firm or any of these prestigious places, that definitely stands out on a resume, but focus on the content of what you did. Because if what you're doing as a solo practitioner is similar or very much the same as what you do at a big law firm at lower price ranges, that can be very attractive to an employer. So I think it's all about highlighting your experiences and the substance of what you did, and try to match, try to make sure that it shows a continuous story and a narrative that makes sense to people.
All right, we probably have time for one more question. Does anyone have anything?
And anyone can just jump in, and you don't need to put it in the chat. You can just jump in and ask questions.
I actually have one that's not on my list, but I just thought that so before the pandemic, we were networking, and there are always some lawyers saying that we're lawyers were boring. So if he, her is the interviewer, they'll be happy to see one final line on the resume about like your activities, anything else that show that you're a fun person, good coworker. What's your view on that?
Include it. You want to show that you're a normal, happy, well-rounded person, and that you're not a boring lawyer, right? But there's do's and don'ts on that. Some of the, for the most part, hobbies and all the things that people put in, totally fine. There are sometimes things that just are inappropriate that people put in as their hobbies, and there, I can't think of them off the top of my head, but like sometimes it raises an eyebrow, like, wow, this person put in something that seemed like it was way too personal, or not like what you would typically see as a hobby or an activity. So it's all about using your good judgment to decide what should go in, but definitely have a line down there that shows that, you enjoy traveling, hiking, reading books, whatever it is.
Sounds great.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you all of you for coming and joining us for this workshop. We are very excited for your peer review to be completed. Don't forget, if you are assigned to peer review someone else's resume, please complete it by Monday at the time that I emailed out. If you need an extension, just let us know so we don't have the other person who's waiting for their resume to be reviewed still waiting and wondering when they're going to get their feedback.
Angela,
Again,
if I can just add one more note.
Sure. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, if you're one of the few who raised your hands at the beginning and said that you love resume updating, kudos to you. Let's spread that positive energy. Your friends, coworkers, colleagues, we all need that more than ever these days. Thanks to all of you for spending time with me today and for making time for yourself, because that's what resumes are really about. It's about reimagining your career and your life. And so whether you're a law student or a seasoned legal professional, I hope what you take away from this session is just renewed energy and excitement for the next stage of your career. And if you have any other questions or ever want to reach out, you can find me on the Major Lindsey Africa website.
Great. Thanks very much.
That was an incredible presentation, Tom. Can we all give her a round of applause? Emoji applause, live applause, whatever works.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
All right. Bye, everyone.